All right, welcome back for another episode of the PSL2 season in review. Today we're covering the Undella Divers, captained by Max Brown. Um, he ended the season 6-8, I believe. Sorry, hold on. Yeah, 6-8 with a negative 12 game differential. So a pretty middling season, definitely in the middle of the pack.
Good for
Um,
third place, though. Or
yeah,
fourth
good
place.
for
Fourth
yeah,
place.
fourth, definitely top half of the league. Just based on game differential with that three-way tie-in record.
Mm.
His team consisted of Curum, Empoleon, Hippowdon, Cresselia, Conkeldurr, Azumarill, Sigilif, Nidoking, Venusaur, and Victini, as well as Tornadus. Um, it's definitely a cool roster. I like a lot of the Pokemon on it. There's definitely some
Appreciate
major
it.
flaws to it, though. Um, the elephant in the room is definitely the overhaul that this roster went through towards the middle of the season. Um,
Yeah.
it was, it was a huge retooling, a great use of the free agent board, and a judicial use of trades. I thought it was great. It was definitely what he needed to give him a shot, because as people figured
Yeah.
out kind of what his roster's weaknesses were, it was only going to get worse after the first round robin, I think. Um, but yeah, with that retooling, he manages to maintain his 3-4 pace from the first round robin through the second, when I definitely think it would have declined going into that second half. Um, there were some struggles adapting to the use of the new roster, like he didn't necessarily know how best to use each new Pokemon. Um, so there were some growing pains, but it still helped him maintain the same record, which is good in my opinion.
Yeah. I think that Max could have leveraged his roster even quite a bit better than he did. It's easy to go in and say, "Wow, Max's roster sucks," and it kind of does. But you know, in the second half of the season, we pretty much saw the configuration of Conkeldurr, Empoleon, Kyurem, Nidoking, Tornadus, uh, and then either Victini or Azumarill in that last slot. And I think that he's doing a great disservice to his kind of unbreakable wall combo of Cresselia and Hippowdon. I would have liked to have seen those two used a little bit more. I know Hippowdon doesn't have the best synergy with his roster because his team kind of
The
hates Sandstorm
sandstorm,
being up.
yeah.
Yeah. But what Powdown brings as an individual contributor, I think, can outweigh that in the right scenarios.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Hippowdon is one of the staples of stall as a archetype in this time period of Pokemon. Um, just because he brings that residual damage, and when all your Pokemon have leftovers, they don't care about the residual damage as much.
Yeah,
Um, and so, I mean, like he can definitely work even without full synergy. I think um, something just like off the bat, uh, an aspect of Max's like team building and like planning, I think focuses places too much emphasis on synergies and trying to make like cool things work. To put it bluntly, like and I respect that definitely. But sometimes he'll over index in the team builder on something like Tailwind for his slow hard hitters, like something
yeah,
like that is an example that he brought multiple times that is kind of really bad and hard to make work in this gen.
yeah.
um
Bring better Tornadus sets, Max. Your Tornadus
yeah.
sets are terrible, man.
um
I understand your desire to not use Hurricane. Using a 70 accuracy move is very it's hard to stomach, and especially in the only match that you used it, you missed three Hurricanes, which is brutal. But just
yeah,
know that on average, in my opinion, I think there is arguments for Air Slash. It just kind of depends on what you need out of Tornadus. But for
yeah,
you, you need Tornadus to be a hard hitter. You need him to be fearsome, and so you need those extra base power from Hurricane.
yeah,
I'd also the only support move I really want to see you running on Tornadus is Taunt. It does have Trickster. That sounds nice, and you want to use Trickster, but Thing is, he already outspeeds everything naturally, so Trister is
He
kind of like a
gets
waste of ability on
he
him.
get he gets a really crazy prankster move next gen, but there really aren't that many of them
Yeah,
in this generation.
defog, is that what you're referring
Defog,
to?
yeah,
Yeah,
defog.
that's really good. But
Priority hazard removal is crazy. You can do.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I think especially, and that's a good point about Tornadus's role in the team because he's kind of like supposed to be the star, right? I pushed for the trade, um, and definitely advised him to do this because he filled like he was the best shot at filling a role that Max's team I think desperately needed, which was just that premium
special wall
offensive
breaker.
threat. Yeah,
Yeah,
a premium offensive threat with speed, which his team lacks almost entirely. His fastest is a base 100, and that's like
mhm.
mediocre. Like that's the bar that you have to
I mean, it's
clear
good.
to be
It's
fast.
100 is good. It's just not exceptional.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so that and you need him to be able to pose a threat like on top of that speed to make the speed mean something. That's why Crobat isn't that good because it's not that strong with the speed. Um,
Yeah.
I
Also,
think
the random psychics kind of makes his typing a little bit
yeah, yeah.
undesirable. But yeah,
Yeah, but pure flying isn't exactly desirable either. What
yeah,
makes
and
those like S tier offensive threats in this metagame work, like Latios or Volcarona, for example, is they have a really good typing as well with some decent bulk that lets them come in and actually like take a hit, and that's how they're able to like generate momentum. They like anyone with speed and a decent move can revenge kill, and Tornadus can definitely do that for you. But his lack of great defenses and typing means that he can't just switch in on a move, except for maybe a very obvious earthquake. Um, a bit
it'll
and
happen.
just like yeah, it'll happen, but it's not like it's just one thing, and he can't just like get a free switch and then threaten with a really strong move after that. Um, and so I don't know like what I can do to remedy that with the Pokemon on the roster and on the free agent board. There aren't really many good options. So that kind of gets at like a major point of his season, which is like, yeah, you just weren't really set up for success.
Yeah. I mean, the main takeaway that Dean and I had from watching your games, Max, was that it's really hard to point out just recurring strategic errors because you'll make a mistake here and there, but it's not like Dean and I don't do that same thing, right? It's like
Yeah.
we like not the best click, but um or not the worst click, but still not a very good click. That happens
Yeah. You get
like
mediocre clicks.
everyone, yeah. Um, and I could go to each game and be like, okay, well, I don't like when you use this move because
Yeah. I can do
it
that to my
doesn't
own
give an
games. Yeah.
indication of X, Y, or Z, and it doesn't set you up for success, X and Y, or you just left this guy in when you shouldn't have. Everyone has those kind of brain lapses. Of course, they can be tightened up, but yeah, man, I think that you can win in the playoffs, but you're going to need better prep for sure. You can't just be bringing that same core. I know that it isn't a bad core by any means, but it's not the most generalizable core. Oh, I will say there's one thing that you didn't do but once this season, and it is press V create on Victory.
Did you count them?
Yes, press
Yeah,
it
it was one.
once.
It was one. That's crazy. For those who don't know, V-Create is a 180 base power fire type move, and Victini is also a fire type. So really, it's like a base 270, which is stronger than Draco Meteor. It's one of the craziest strong moves in the game.
Yeah, like even Pokemon that resist it and are defensively oriented don't want to switch into it. Like literally what happened is the one time you pressed it on switch to Rotom and it did 95%. I shit you not.
Yeah,
And it was a defensive Rotom set.
yeah.
So, you know, Victini is on your roster and is a good Pokemon because it presses V Create and kills everything.
Or hits
Unless it's
U-turn,
like a mute
but you
four
want to
times.
hit Vicreate.
Yeah. So be pressing that button, Max, because even on resists, it's a 135 base power move, right? So it's going to be your best option a lot of the time. It might not always. If you, so, there were a couple. I think specifically game one versus Auden, that same game. I think that was one of your more interesting games. You used Victini Bolt Strike to clean in the late game. I think that was a solid. You played that game solidly. You played every game solidly. It's just that minor mistakes for you cost you an entire game, right?
Yeah,
And it
like
never
here's
be the case.
like can you do like a chess analogy? Like is it like starting the game with, instead of like a bishop knight and
It's
a
just starting
rook?
the game without a piece.
Well, like what if all your bishops, knights, and rooks were just all knights? Like that would be pretty good, but it's just like not. Do you
Yeah,
think that'd be good?
starting the game with your rooks being that's probably actually a really good way to put it. It's starting the
Yeah,
game with both of your rooks being one of the minors, whether it's a knight or a bishop. It doesn't
yeah,
matter if you play just as well as your opponent throughout that game. You're going to lose in the end game because you have just shittier pieces than your
yeah,
opponent. So you need to, and I think that is never more apparent than in your games versus Daniel, where Daniel just slaps his big ass Latios on your face
yeah.
and just like beats you across the side of the head with it
That's
repeatedly,
that's
and you
that's
have
really
no
good
answer.
imagery. Yeah. Um, yeah. Definitely both of those games were marked as just like lost to the tier list.
Yeah,
That happens versus me too. You can't really answer. Once I got a rock up, Alakazam is just like fuck it. Like what can you even do versus
yeah.
him? He's
Well, that's why
faster
you
and
need.
he'll one shot everything.
Yeah, that's why he needs to bring Cresselia, specifically, especially defensive Cresselia in both of those matchups. It is
Yeah,
absolutely critical. That being
yeah,
said, his matchup versus you is like completely doomed still, because I guess actually it's not completely doomed. I guess he does still have powerful physical attackers to force Ray Nicholas out after the setup or something similar, but
yeah. It's
um,
hard.
yeah, it's
Hippowdon
hard.
has roar or whirlwind, but yeah, no, it's pretty hard. Um, another matchup that I think was this one is like not quite the same tone. I like this matchup a lot, and it's actually one of our playoff quarterfinals matchups.
Is
And
that Max
I,
Kevin?
yeah, Max Kevin is a really good matchup. I think. So
With this,
just for the record, it was -3 for Max in game one, and then in the rematch it was +4. So very tight. He was
yeah,
kind of just I mean, he kind of just got beat by having a shitty roster in the first one. I mean, he made some plays. It was close. It was a 3 Pokemon win, but like in the second one, he comes back with that roster and plays about the same level and just wins by a lot more.
is a better Pokemon.
Yeah. Um, and I don't think it's completely unwinnable for Kevin though. Like I definitely think with some improved play, he could obviously take 3 games off of him. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this relatively even in the regular season matchup ends up in the playoffs over a 5 game series.
Yeah, I mean, purely based on roster, I still like Kevin in the matchup, but
It's
I do
really
have
hard to
faith.
answer all that offense when you don't have
Yeah,
your best defenders in,
yeah. Well, it is interesting because I
because what
actually
if he
think that
brings them?
kind of the offense versus offense is also still an interesting match. He can sort of play both sides and not really expose himself too much. Uh, and then the issue with bringing Hippowdon is that helps like Sandstorm. Kevin is totally fine with Sandstorm,
Yeah.
and Max is like, "Oh my god, I hate Sandstorm." So
Yeah.
Hippowdon was kind of an interesting pick for this roster for that reason.
Hmm. Um, that like I just got to be honest, like the prioritization of Pokemon was just completely out of whack with the initial draft for this team. Like Kyurem as a first pick has got to be the league's craziest pick in
Yeah,
history at this point. Like that's just it's like a BL mon, I think,
yeah.
optimistically.
It's like picking DeAndre Ayton number one to make a basketball reference.
Yeah.
Um,
um,
And in a draft where it's like there's Michael Jordan, Luka Doncic, LeBron, like
yeah.
there's so many ways that you can pick right, and then you pick Hiram, and it's like what?
Um, and then just some weird like picking like role players when there are stars available. Just in general, like it's just it's a shame. And I think the main point of like the overarching theme here is just draft better and you'll be better. And that's like really simplistic, but it's true. It's just like I would love to see Max come to season 3 with like, a little notebook, not necessarily exactly a notebook, but like having a plan and drafting well around it. And I just think honestly, I think he has potential to be a contender in next season if he
Yeah,
comes with a roster like yours or mine this season.
definitely. And I think that it's likely that the rosters in general are going to be much more balanced next season due to some
I hope so.
changes we're implementing in the league.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I expect to see you at the top of the table, Max, simply because you do play quite well.
Yeah, I mean he's already top half, so it's just moving him up one slot. It's not that big of a jump.
Yeah, and I think that it's also even in the cards to upset one of me or Dean in
Yeah,
that slot, right? It just depends on. I like to think I'm a little that I'm better still. I am higher rated on the OU ladder than you, better
yeah,
win rate with a better win rate. So I think that I maybe have a little bit of an edge there. Dean has an edge as well, but I
yeah,
think that if maybe if you come with the best roster, right? If you just create a masterpiece roster that just works really well together, because the team building challenge is going to be uh, much more about like creating synergistic Pokemon, hopefully, and teams, as opposed to this season where it's kind of like stack as much power as you can in
yeah,
the next season. And so if you make the best roster by just like out planning us there, I don't know why you couldn't finish first, right? I think it's completely reasonable.
yeah. Um, I just I think that's like most of what like that's the big idea. We can get into more specifics, but that like I think I definitely said my piece about Tornadus and my thoughts on its
I
role in
don't
the
think you should
team.
be bringing Nidoking very much.
Yeah, yeah. I think the fact you touched on it earlier, but he used Victini more for Bolt Strike, which is a non-stab move. It's not even that good of a move. Um, it's like just I mean it's just clear that he needs an electric type to me. I think electric types are really undervalued. Um, but having a good one can make your team like save your team so much stress in a lot of matchups. Like for me, Rotom Heat is so critical. Um, and for you, Thunderous is obviously putting up MVP numbers. An
Yeah,
electric type is a very important type. It only hits two things super effectively, and it even has an immunity on it. But those two types are two of the most common and good types in the game:
yeah,
water and
especially
fire.
water. Yeah,
Yeah,
and also even though it has it only has like those three types, right? And then it hits water and it hits flying, and then it kind of hits everything else, right? Well, obviously, it hits everything else neutrally, so it still ends up being, in my opinion, generally a very good attacking type.
yeah,
Um, it also has some defensive utility as well. If unfortunately the free agent board has closed down, but I really would have liked to seen you pick up um, an electric type to pair with the Victini as a little Voltron core. So I would have probably gone with Rotom or Raikou, uh, or potentially even Eviolite Magneton, though maybe a little bit less good. Even Galvantula is on the board as well. I mean, you had a lot of options. They were just never really picked up, though. I think that they would do a lot more for your team than Nidoking or Venusaur. Though I do kind of like Venusaur because your team in the first game versus Auden, you brought a really interesting configuration. You brought a sunny day team with the Venusaur and Victini, and I actually,
I liked that. Yeah,
yeah, that can make your team quite scary because literally, I don't think there's anything that can switch into Victini, Choice Band, V-Great in the sun. Uh,
that's got to be one of the strongest moves ever, man.
yeah,
Um, And then Venusaur having chlorophyll with the sun, I mean, fixes a lot of your speed tier issues, especially earlier before Tornadus was acquired.
Yeah,
I don't think
totally.
it's a bad. I don't think it's a bad idea at all.
Yeah. It is a bit of a double-edged sword in the Kevin matchup specifically because it does make that Infernape overheat very threatening
Yeah,
and very hard to switch into. But if we're talking about, and it's also a little bit double-edged
but then
against
once you,
Elijah because you're buffing a Volcarona, but like versus me, my team hates being in the sun.
mm-hmm.
Daniel's team
and
hates being in the sun. So it's
and
something.
a good answer to both Infernape and Volcarona happens to be the Tornadus. It outspeeds. It's
Yeah,
super
true.
effectively with stab. It's a great fit.
Yeah.
Wait, actually, Hurricane might have like 30 accuracy in the sun.
Oh
I
yeah.
think it might.
It has. I think it has
It's
50%
50.
accuracy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll have to run air
Never
slash.
mind.
You'll have to run air slash if you're in the sun.
Yeah,
I I don't think if you have the sun, then you're not as lacking in power.
for power.
Is
Yeah,
yeah.
no, that's a
So
good point.
you can afford to bring air slash.
We're doing all the cooking for Max here. Like,
Yeah. Well, I mean that's like really I think the crux of what he needs to do, right? I mean, yeah, button up the play a little bit, right? Focus a little
yeah,
more.
obviously, always. That's the
You'll win
playoffs.
more,
You got
of
to.
course, yeah. But there was a profound lack of cooking, right? It's like everyone over the course of the season, really, except for you, Max, like was really like experimenting with their roster.
That's the point of the season, right?
Yeah, and also your roster, because it's so weak, you're probably the one that's most in dire need of experimentation. You need to be cooking. You need to be like, okay, I need specific answers. I need to play to my strengths as much as I can, right? Like these types of things are going to be much more important to you because the edges that you need to find are much smaller than and much harder to find and much more important than they would be for anyone else. So I'd like to see a little bit more creativity. I'd like to see not just a standard configuration in your match versus Kevin. Like I don't necessarily see a problem, suppose, with that what was it? Empoleon, Kyurem. Don't bring Nido King. But Tornadus, Victini, Conkeldurr, you
Like
can bring,
Azu's, yeah.
but I don't think it's your best chance. In fact, I'm almost certain it's not your best chance, right?
I
So
think my opinion on that configuration is that it's just a little bit. Some of the roster, like some of those Pokemon's roles, are a little bit too overlapping, and there's not really a commitment towards. It's kind of stuck between like stall and balance to me. Like there's not very many like defensive mons that act as glue
yeah,
for those stall teams, and the offense is a little lacking still. So I would like to see a bit more. Um, yeah, just some different configurations. I will like say that we did just well, I at least made fun of the cooking that happened actually earlier in the season in the first round robin with the tailwind sets, etc. I was just like, just run normal shit.
yeah,
On
true.
we did say that earlier in the episode, but
Well,
um,
take Tailwind out of the kitchen, bro.
tailwind is not a
That's a
good
terrible
ingredient. Yeah.
ingredient. It's not the sauce.
Yeah. I think the takeaway should just be, you know, definitely do experiment. You want to get to know your roster. It's better when you're not going to have to retool it halfway through the season. You just I don't know. I mean, it's going to fix itself because hopefully your draft will be better and you won't have to change it, and you'll have more time to experiment. Um, so yeah, I'm very hopeful for the future, as I've said before.
Yeah, and you won't need donations
Yeah,
anymore because
yeah,
Max, 100%. I donated Tortoise to you because I was like, I'm
it's
never running this guy,
yeah,
and I feel bad for you because
yeah,
your roster sucks, dog, and I think you're a good player. So
yeah.
all that went into it.
A little bit of league tampering, but it's for the greater good of the product.
Yeah,
We all have to deny some trades, sometimes veto some stuff. Can't allow super teams anymore. Um, and
yeah.
we also can't have tanking teams. It's bad for viewership. So focusing
We
more
don't
on the
more 100+ turn games.
yeah,
I guess the
and
occasional 100 turn game could be hype, but especially if it's like a complex battle. But yeah,
yeah. I don't think those are gonna occur.
yeah.
I think
For those to occur, both players have to be playing quite well. So
yeah. Um,
so far, that happens
it's
in like
not.
1% of
Yeah,
PSL.
it's pretty rare, but it's beautiful when you see it. I think to refocus more on the present instead of the future for Max. I mean, he is still in the playoffs, and I think he has a decent shot of at least
Yeah,
making the semifinals, and then he's gonna have to fight. But I think, to zero in on the positives for this team. I think the physical attackers are obviously great. There's a lot of them, so you have to be careful of that overlap. But I think maximum having like two would be great. Azumarill has great stab priority. It's kind of probably my least favorite of them, though, to be honest.
yeah.
Conqueror, though, is really strong. I mean, he's your MVP. He is just he's hard
Well, he's
body,
kind of the
man.
MVP because he was like the only one that was there for every game. I will say.
Yeah, there's that. But also, he was doing work in every game too.
True, true.
Um,
Which is
Relative to the
criminal, but
team's amount of work.
yeah,
I think it's a good mon. It's like bad OU, it's like C. I don't know. It's a
it's
fine mon.
it's the D tier OU Pokemon that just it's too
Yeah,
good to be in UU. Like it's
yeah.
completely unviable in OU.
um, but yeah,
Ooh,
Conkeldurr definitely
another
can put
thing
in work for you.
I remember now. Your team is really weak to status spreaders, Max. You actually have like no one that really likes switching status moves. So for that reason,
Sigilyph.
I'd like to see Guts Conkeldurr much more often if you are to bring
That's
Conkeldurr. I don't think the Sheer Force set is a good option for you because
yeah,
like basically all your Pokemon get shut down by one status move.
yeah.
So
And a lot of the moves that like I mean, we've seen it with the use of sheer force. A lot of the moves that you want to be clicking as Conkeldurr as a Pokemon don't get sheer force, like Mach Punch and Drain Punch. Those don't get affected. So it's just kind of some anti synergy there. I think Guts is definitely better. That's a good point.
and also
Kyurem.
you could even do non like orb gut sets because it's just like such a guarantee that status will happen in a game that you can just like
You see
switch it
that
in.
Slowbro in? It's clicking T Wave, man.
Yeah, it's clicking T Wave versus clicking Toxic.
Yeah,
Same applies to Milotic. Uh, and then if you have leftovers, like you don't mind having a burn.
yeah,
That's in fact that's like an awesome scenario for you. So
yeah. Um, I think that another mon that put up a lot of work was Kyurem. I mean, it's just one of those dragons
it's
doing the
good.
Draco Meteor. It's got a decent speed tier. I mean, yeah, decent. Um, and
It's like the the worst good dragon.
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
Yeah, and so it's still good, but
yeah,
I think you could use it better. A lot
hmm
of times you switch Kyurem into special walls and then just like press special moves over and
yeah. I've
over.
seen that happen. I saw that happen a couple times.
Um, that's not really how you want to use Kyurem. You want to use Kyurem to force a switch, set up a sub, and then maybe get some chips, switch out once they switch into their special wall, or if they don't have a special wall, then sub Kyurem super threatening and can actually just win the game. Like Kyurem is
Yeah,
a good Pokemon and is a genuinely like tournament viable option for
yeah.
Black and White OU. I would just like to see it used a bit more appropriately.
And I don't blame um Max for kind of the lack of cooking that we talked about. It's like it's kind of when I start to think about this roster, like for example, when I'm doing like scrimmages as Max's team, it's kind of hard to know what to take exactly because there are so many viable options. These are
Yeah,
Pokemon that can do multiple things, like Empoleon, um, like Cresselia as Conkeldurr. They all have different viable sets, so it's kind of hard to know which ones to pick. Um, so I don't blame you, but like for some advice on that problem, I would just try to pick a direction, like a pace, You know, if you want to play fast, if you want to play slow, and then just find Pokemon that fit that rhythm. Like, if you want to play fast, you're definitely bringing like all your fast mods. You know, if you're playing slow, then it's fine to bring the fatter ones, but bring the good fat ones, not the bad ones.
If you're playing slow, you should probably be doing Sun. I
Yeah,
will say,
yeah,
because Cresselia with Sun boosted Moonlight is unbreakable.
yeah. That's a
Basically,
really good recovery move.
75% of your HP a turn
Yeah,
is crazy, and she
yeah.
is already super bulky. So
hmm Um, yeah. I think that's my best advice that I can give. In for this season is just like pick a pace and run with it. Uh, are there any other thoughts that you have on Max's roster?
I like the way that you used Empoleon. I thought it was quite creative, bringing the agility sets here and there. I don't like Azumarill very much. I think that as a wall breaker, it is outclassed generally by Victini in your roster.
Yep.
I don't want to see Sigilith ever. That's a lie. Maybe sometimes Sigilith, but generally no.
Yeah.
And I really don't think there's a place for Nidoking on your team. I just think you should like, and maybe against me, just because it's like a switch into Thunderous where you don't really have one otherwise, but you're not going to face me in playoffs. So I don't
Yeah.
know. It's not very useful against Dean. It's not very useful. Uh,
Unless he meets you in the finals.
Seven. Yeah, I guess it's possible. I mean,
Yeah.
I think his matchup versus you is quite poor because
Yeah.
his only option to switch into Hydreigon and Draco Meteor is Empoleon, and probably still doesn't even like doing that. And then
Yeah.
that Empoleon just gets walled by a Fable or by a Alomomola, any number of things. I mean, even a Snow can be a Empoleon on your team. So
You're gonna make him lose hope. um, I think. Yeah. If I were to put it in just like, I think this is just like a team constructed entirely out of role players, and that's
yeah,
just really impressive. Like these Pokemon would all be pretty good contributors if I just swapped them out for some of my lower round picks on my team. You know, like I would love to have
yeah.
Conkeldurr for my Amoonguss. You know, like
Yeah.
like
It's all role players, but this is no 2014 Spurs, right? This is
yeah,
not a team that's winning the chip. I'm sorry,
yeah,
Max. I hate to break it to you, buddy.
yeah,
I think you know what you've done. I think you realize it. You're gonna
yeah.
go into the draft for Gen 6 better prepared.
hmm
Um, but I respect the hustle. I
Yeah.
respect the Curum first overall.
It was definitely it left the room silent. I remember on draft night I was just like, "Oh, I didn't know." I remember for like the first couple of weeks of the
I
season, I
wasn't
didn't
familiar with
know.
your game.
Yeah. For the first couple of weeks of the season, I wasn't like I was afraid to talk to Max about his draft because I was like, um I don't know if he knows like how bad it is. And then luckily, you came out and we're just like, yeah, my roster's shit when we were talking about just PSL generally. And I was like, yeah, man, it is. It is. I'm so glad we can just say that.
It was really funny. You were like hyping him up. You're like, yeah, I guess it wasn't first overall, right? I guess it was third overall for.
Third overall,
Yeah,
first for his team. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You were hyping him up. You were like, yeah, Max has pretty good Pokemon experience, I think, and I think
Yeah.
some of his friends have helped him prep for this. And then you just like
Yeah.
come and he's like, all right, Volcarona, Garchomp. In second, it's like, okay, this not bad
Yeah.
picks, and you're just like, let me get Curum, and then like
That's a
regular
perfect
Curum.
impression. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, regular Curum.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I mean that's not
Boom.
even the
What
best
up?
Curum, bro.
Yeah, that was definitely a moment in PSL history that will never be forgotten. Already making history in his first draft ever. And
Yeah,
that's another thing. I think it's really impressive. Definitely the best of the three newcomers this season. Um, and
No,
just
it's
another
close
reason.
between him and Kev, but
Yeah, I
in
mean they
terms
have
of
the same
the
record.
play, definitely he's
Yeah,
most impressive to me.
yeah, um, and yeah, I mean I think that's unless you have anything else, we could keep talking about how impressive Max's play is despite the roster for hours. But if there's anything else pertinent you have to add,
Nah,
um,
not really.
all right, cool. Well, then we'll call it there and be returning for the last episode of the season in review with the Driftvale Dingoes. So thanks for watching.